A solitary Maia steers a vessel of silver light into the endless dark. This is Tilion, chosen to guide the moon on its first voyage above the world of Arda. His decision to leave the timeless music of his kind marks the beginning of an eternal vigil, a lonely watch where the stakes are the very hope of all who live in shadow. But a subtle tension already stirs, born from the distant, jealous flame of Arion the sun. By the end of this journey, you will see the entire history of Middle-earth through the eyes of its most patient guardian. What ancient evil did his first beams awaken in the northern mountains? And how did a single moment of darkness help save the world from ruin? I often wonder about the quiet stories happening right now under the moon's gaze. Where are you listening from? And what does the night look like outside your window? What small act of courage do you think goes unnoticed in the dark? With a final, gentle push, Tilion coaxed the last silver fruit of Tulperion into the vessel of the moon. The world below was a sea of absolute black, a gloom so profound it felt almost solid. He began his first ascent, physically pressing upwards against this clinging darkness, a solitary mariner on an uncharted ocean of night. As the moon climbed, its pale light spilled across the sleeping continents, touching the silent forests and the still rivers. It was a light of quiet hope, not of blaze, and in its soft glow, the first nocturnal creatures stirred, their eyes opening to a new kind of day. High in the elven watchtowers, sentinels gazed up in wonder, while deep in the tangled woods, other, older things lifted their heads in wary scrutiny. The raw, untamed world seemed to resist this new order. Shadows did not merely lie where they were cast. They clung to the land, writhing and twisting as if with a malevolent will. Tilion felt the immense, crushing weight of his task, a loneliness more vast than the void he sailed through. The darkness was not an empty absence. It was a presence that pushed back. In that moment, he made a choice. He reached deep within his own spirit, drawing upon the essential light of his being as a Maia, and he poured it into the silver vessel. The moon's glow strengthened, its beams cutting more decisively through the murk, casting clearer, sharper silver patterns on the landscape below. This act of self-sacrifice anchored the moon as a permanent fixture of the night sky, a gift of enduring beauty. Yet in making himself a brighter beacon, he also became a clearer target. His amplified radiance, a testament to his devotion, now shone like a challenge into the deepest shadows. And as those determined beams finally reached the jagged, twisted peaks of the Iron Mountains in the far north, they touched upon ancient stone that had known no light. Something imprisoned within those cold depths, something that had festered in perfect blackness for millennia, sensed the intrusion. A slow, cold awareness began to stir, recognizing not just a new light, but a new power to be challenged, to be tested, and perhaps to be extinguished. A shadow detached itself from the peaks below, a shape of such immense and deliberate malice that it seemed to swallow the starlight around it. This was no mindless beast of the void, but a crafted horror of Morgoth, a winged creature whose purpose was singular, to extinguish the new light. It rose on vast, leathern wings, a living shard of the darkness, climbing directly toward the moon. In that moment, Tilion's solitude became a terrifying vulnerability. He was a single point of light in an endless expanse, with nowhere to hide. Instinct screamed for him to stand and fight, to unleash the silver fire within him against this challenger. But a deeper wisdom prevailed, the wisdom of his sacred charge. He could not risk the moon itself, the hope of all Middle-earth, in a battle against a creature born for destruction. His duty was not to conquer, but to endure. With a thought that was both prayer and command, he wrenched his celestial vessel from its ordained path. The moon, which had flowed in a serene arc, now jolted into a swift, unpredictable curve. It was a desperate, ungainly maneuver, a dance of evasion against a partner that sought only to consume. The creature swept past, so close that Tilion felt the chilling vacuum of its passage, a cold that threatened to leach the very warmth from his spirit. It was a nearness that left a psychic scar upon the sky. From that night forward, the moonlight that fell upon that particular stretch of the northern world carried a faint, unsettling chill, a subliminal dread that would linger for an age, a ghost of that first pursuit. The peace of the heavens had been irrevocably broken. His journey was no longer a lonely vigil. It was a gauntlet he had to run each and every night, where survival was the first and most crucial victory. The memory of those vast, beating wings haunted his ascent, and his gaze upon the lands below sharpened from wonder to a soldier's watchfulness. He began to map the slow, creeping advance of the shadows from the north, not as a distant observer, but as a guardian, learning the movements of a relentless enemy. His silver gaze swept the vast, sleeping lands until it settled upon a single, secret place by a lake. There, something new was stirring, not the ancient, brooding shadows of the world, but beings of pure wonder, opening their eyes for the very first time. These were the Elves, the firstborn of Iluvatar, and they were utterly vulnerable in a world they did not understand. Tilion felt a pull stronger than any celestial gravity, a need to shield this fragile dawn. He could not descend, but he could focus. He gathered his light, concentrating its beams upon the waters of Cuiviénen, transforming the dark, menacing forest into a tapestry of soft silver and deep, safe shadow. He painted luminous trails between the trees, marking paths that led away from hidden dangers and toward clearings of peace. For the first time, the elves looked up. Their fear of the unknown dark melted into awe as they beheld the gentle face in the sky, a guardian who had answered a question they had not yet learned to ask. Their first words were not of fear, but of music, songs woven from the sound of water and the sight of moonlit leaves, each note a thread in the bond being forged between their race and the night. Yet this profound connection brought its own agony. Tilion's heart ached with a new kind of loneliness, for his path was fixed. He could not linger over them. With each passing hour, he was dragged inexorably onward, forced to abandon his watch, leaving the elves to the mercy of the coming dawn and the hidden things that shunned it. He could not remain, but he could leave a gift. Pouring a measure of his own spirit into the light he had shed, he imprinted those safe paths into the very essence of the glades and streams. Long after his vessel had sailed over the horizon, the starlit silver he had woven into the landscape would remain, a permanent guide etched into the world itself. This act of creation sealed the fate of the elves, giving them the courage and the direction to begin their first tentative journeys. But from his high throne in the north, another power took note. Melkor, the great enemy, felt the shift in the world's song. He saw the love the elves held for this new light, and he coveted them. They were not just creatures to be feared, but a beautiful order to be broken, a loyalty to be twisted into worship of his own dark majesty. Tilion's protection had also made them a target, and so, as the firstborn gathered their courage and began their long, hopeful trek westward, the Maia of the Moon turned his face to follow their slow progress across the continent, his light a constant, watchful companion on their perilous road. A tremor passed through the fabric of the world, a silent scream that reached even the highest paths of the sky. Tilion felt it first as a sudden dimming, a draining of all vitality from the light below. He turned his gaze westward, toward the blessed realm of Valinor, and witnessed the impossible. The radiant trees, Laurelin and Tulperion, the very source of the light he now carried, were dying. Their glorious gold and silver faded into a sickly gray, and then into a blackness so absolute it seemed to scar the heavens. In that terrible void, a single, monstrous figure moved. It was Morgoth, and in his clawed hand, he clutched 3 jewels that blazed with a stolen, agonizing splendor. The Silmarils. Here was a crime that defied the very order of creation, the murder of light itself. A cold fury, purer and sharper than any he had ever known, ignited within Tilion. His duty was to illuminate, to reveal, and so he did. He poured every measure of his power into the moon, focusing its beams into a single, brilliant lance of silver that fell upon the fleeing Dark Lord. For a fleeting, crucial moment, Morgoth was pinned in that light, his path across the land etched in stark relief against the newly darkened world. It was a declaration of war, a silent shout of defiance from the heavens. That single act of revelation gave the Valar their first and only clue. They saw the direction of his flight, the shadow he cast as he ran, and their pursuit began. But in helping them, Tilion had made a permanent enemy. Morgoth now knew the silver eye in the sky was not a passive wonder, but a watchful sentinel that could betray his movements. The internal conflict for Tilion became a torment. Was he merely a lamp, a constant, impartial source of light for all things, good and evil alike? Or was he a guardian, a soldier in this eternal war, whose light could be a weapon to expose the wicked? He chose a middle path, one that felt like a coward's compromise. He did not strike again. Instead, he began to silently track the movement of the darkness from the north, watching the slow, cancerous growth of Morgoth's fortress of Angband, mapping the movements of his armies under the convenient cover of night. He gathered intelligence without acting, a silent witness to horrors unfolding below. This passive role began to feel less like wisdom and more like a profound failure. With the trees gone and the Silmarils stolen, his own borrowed light was now one of the last great lights in the world. Its importance had magnified 1,000-fold, yet his actions felt smaller than ever. The memory of those 3 stolen jewels haunted his endless journey. They were out there, somewhere in the vast darkness, prisoners of the very shadow that sought to quench all hope. He had helped reveal the thief, but he had not stopped the theft. The weight of that distinction settled upon him, a new kind of celestial gravity. From that moment on, his vigil changed. He resolved that his gaze would be sharper, his mind more attentive. He would watch not just the land, but the treasures upon it, knowing that beauty and light were always targets for the shadow. His light would be a shield, and his memory, a ledger of all that was precious and needed protection. This silent vow would soon be tested, for another great work of elven hands was taking shape in the hidden kingdom of Doriath, a treasure woven from starlight and magic that would soon catch the jealous eye of the dark. From the ruins of the Great War, a new island rose from the sea, a gift to the faithful. Tilion watched as the Edain, the race of men who had stood against the shadow, stepped onto its shores for the first time. They were so fragile, their lives a flicker compared to his ageless vigil, and he felt a profound kinship with these children of the night who looked to his light for guidance. He made a quiet, deliberate choice, a gentle nudge against the celestial mechanics. He slowed his passage just slightly when his silver orb hung over the star-shaped land of Númenor, granting its people nights that seemed to linger, filled with a light of exceptional clarity and brilliance. Under these prolonged moons, the Númenorians did not sleep. They learned to navigate by the stars his light did not drown out, to chart tides governed by his pull, and to build ships that could dare the open ocean. Their civilization blossomed in the silver hours, their calendars and their very lore woven around the phases of the moon. He was no longer just their lantern in the sky, he was their silent partner. This favoritism did not go unnoticed. A ripple of discord, faint as a tremor in starlight, passed through the music of the spheres. Tilion sensed the silent question from his kin, the subtle disapproval of the other Ainur. His path was meant to be constant, a perfect, impartial clockwork. He was deviating, playing favorites with the children of Iluvatar, yet looking down upon the white towers and bustling shipyards, seeing the reverence they held for the heavens, he felt his choice was justified. Strengthening the faithful was a cause that transcended mere orbital precision. He would continue his gentle patronage, a secret blessing for the people of the star. This bond forged the greatest mariners the world would ever know, the Dunedain, whose ships now ventured to the very edges of the world. But in gifting them such power, he had stepped onto a new and dangerous path. His light, which had once only revealed, was now actively shaping a mortal destiny. He watched their proud vessels, like floating castles, set sail under his benevolent gaze, their white sails glowing in the moonlight. He saw their courage, but he did not yet see the shadow. He could not perceive the slow, insidious turn in their hearts, the pride that began to whisper that such gifts were not merely given, but were a right earned by their own greatness. But a shadow was growing in the very heart of that blessed isle. From his high path, Tilion watched the white city of Armenilos, and he saw a new temple rise, not to Eru who shaped the world, but to the darkness itself. He heard the new prayers, not of gratitude for the gift of life, but of demand for immortality, a grasping hunger that poisoned the very air. On the nights when the king's men gathered for their blasphemous rites, a cold fury would seize the Maia. His purpose was to illuminate truth, not to light the way to its desecration. One fateful evening, as the clamor from the temple reached a fever pitch, he could bear it no longer. He drew his light back, pulling the silver radiance into himself like a held breath. Over the royal city, the moon dimmed to a dull, smoky copper, its light feeble and sickly. A wave of terror swept through the streets of Armenilos. This was no natural eclipse, it was a judgment. The people, who had grown proud and fearless, were suddenly afraid of the dark they had chosen to court. They saw an ill omen in the sky, a withdrawal of divine favor. Yet in the remote havens, the faithful looked up at the strangely shadowed moon and understood. They saw it not as a curse, but as a sign that the heavens themselves wept for their fallen kingdom, and they took heart in the knowledge that they were not forgotten. This act placed Tilion in an agonizing conflict. He was a beacon for all the world, bound by his nature to offer light to the just and the unjust alike. To withdraw it was a violation of his core being, a rebellion against the order of the spheres. Yet to shine fully upon such evil felt like a blessing he could not give. He found a desperate compromise, a dance of light that mirrored the turmoil in his own spirit. He allowed his phases to proceed as the celestial mechanics dictated, but he poured his intention into their quality. When his light fell upon the king's men, it was often a cold, distant silver, revealing the harsh lines of their faces and the emptiness in their eyes. But when his gaze found the hidden coves where the faithful kept their old ways, he focused his being, and his beams became a warm, guiding radiance, illuminating their secret paths to the shore with the clarity of a promise. He was no longer an impartial observer. With every cycle, he was choosing a side, weaving his fate into the mortal drama unfolding below. His subtle light became a thread in the tapestry of their rebellion, a celestial ally in a silent war. His sharpened sight soon caught the glint of steel in the moonlit forests. Beneath the canopy, far from the eyes of the king's soldiers, the faithful were at work. Their axes fell in rhythm with the crashing waves, felling great trees to build ships, not the proud, towering vessels of the royal fleet, but smaller, sturdier craft, designed not for conquest, but for survival. Tilion turned his full, unwavering attention to this clandestine exodus. He memorized the shape of every hull, the location of every hidden shipyard. He watched as families gathered their precious scrolls and heirlooms under the cover of his brightest nights, their faces etched with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. The fate of a whole people now rested on a secret flight, and the Maia of the moon became their silent, watchful sentinel, charting their every preparation for the great escape to come. The sea was a forest of masts, a fleet of such monstrous pride it seemed to challenge the sky itself. Ar-Pharazân's armada advanced upon the shores of the undying lands, their oars beating a rhythm of blasphemy, their sails hungry for a dawn they were forbidden to witness. Tilion watched from his celestial path, and a cold resolution settled within him. To cast his light upon this march would be to sanctify it, to make his silver a torch for the ultimate transgression. He could not. In a single, shuddering act of will, he drew the essence of the moon back into the core of his being. The silver vessel did not merely dim, it vanished. An absolute, suffocating blackness fell upon the world, a darkness that had not been known since the death of the trees. It was a void that mirrored the hollow ambition in the king's heart. On the decks of the invading ships, terror erupted. Men who had laughed at the gods now clutched at a blackness so thick they could feel it, their shouts swallowed by a silence that judged them. This was no natural night. It was a withdrawal of grace, the heavens turning their face away. For Tilion, the emptiness was agony. His very nature screamed in protest at this self-imposed exile from light. He was a guide who had extinguished his own lamp, a guardian who had abandoned his post at the most critical hour. He felt the fabric of his duty tear, a psychic wound that would never fully heal. He had judged that a temporary void was a lesser evil than illuminating a sin that would unravel the music of creation itself. In that profound silence, the world ended. He felt it not as a sound, but as a great, bending sigh. The seas reared up in mountains that swallowed the proud fleet whole. The land itself groaned and shifted, the flat disk of the world curling in upon itself. He held his breath, a solitary point of consciousness in the chaos, waiting, and then, as the cataclysm subsided, he let the light return. It spilled from the silver vessel once more, but it fell upon a world made new. His beams now curved across the vast, round globe of Arda, touching familiar shores and empty ocean. The undying lands were gone, removed forever from the circles of the world, hidden behind a veil no mortal ship could ever breach. His long vigil over Númenor was over, for the star-shaped isle itself was buried beneath the raging waves, a kingdom of pride become a tomb of wrath. The darkness he had chosen had been a scalpel in the hands of the divine, cutting away a cancer from the world. He had helped break the world to save it. The Silver Sea road to the Grey Havens became his nightly vigil. In the Third Age, Tilion turned his gaze again and again to that final shore, where the white ships of the Elves gathered like waiting swans. He watched as the firstborn, their hearts weary with the long weight of the world, walked up the slender piers and departed forever. His purpose was to ensure their last sight of Middle-earth was one of peace and transcendent beauty, so he bathed the havens in a light of impossible clarity, a liquid silver that made the very air seem to shimmer with memory. For the elves looking back from the decks of their vessels, his radiance softened the receding coastline into a dream of what once was, a final, loving benediction. On the shore, the steadfast shipwright Círdan would lift his ancient eyes, finding solace in that constant, gentle light, a silent promise that the journey was watched and blessed. Yet for Tilion, each departure was a small agony. He felt the sorrow of these endless partings as a physical ache, a hollowing of the spirit. The music of their fading joy was a melody that tore at him. A desperate, rebellious urge would sometimes rise within him, a wish to defy the celestial mechanics and simply stop, to hold his position in the sky and grant the Eldar one more hour, one more perfect moment of luminous farewell. But he could not halt the turning of the world. His path was fixed, so he established a new, subtle pattern in his eternal circuit. He learned to slow his passage, stretching the moments of his transit over the havens, making that one specific stretch of coastline a place of prolonged and exceptional lunar radiance. It was his silent, enduring tribute to the people he had first illuminated at the dawn of time. As the age wore on, the stream of departures became a river. Each white ship that caught the wind was another thread of the old magic pulled from the tapestry of the world, and each one felt like a personal loss. His ancient loneliness, once born of mere physical solitude, was now deepened by this accumulating grief, binding him ever more tightly to the mortal realm he was destined to leave behind. He was a constant at a shore of eternal change, a witness to an age of ending. Then, on a night like any other, his focused beam fell upon a small, unusual figure stepping onto Círdan's ship. This was no tall elf with starlight in their eyes, but a halfling, a being of the simple, mortal earth. And as his light touched this small traveler, Tilion sensed a profound shift in the music of the world. This departure was not an ending, but a new and different kind of beginning. His silver gaze followed the dark ribbon of the Anduin, where a single boat moved like a leaf upon the water. Inside were the last hopes of the free world, a small fellowship clinging to secrecy and shadow. High above, a piercing shriek cut through the night, a sound that froze the heart. One of the Nazgul, mounted upon a fell beast, was circling, its invisible will sweeping the river like a searchlight. Tilion felt the malevolent focus of the ring, a dark star pulling at the very fabric of the world, and he knew the hunters were closing in. His mandate was clear, a law of the valor written in starlight: do not interfere, but to stand by and watch this fragile light be extinguished was a betrayal of everything he had ever guarded. He made his choice. With a thought, he gathered the high, thin clouds, weaving them into a veil that blurred the moon's face. The world below sank into a deeper gloom, but the river remained a treacherous, shimmering path. Then, with the precision of a master artist, he worked his light between the gaps in the cloud cover. He cast a complex, dappled pattern upon the water, a camouflage of shifting silver and profound black that perfectly mirrored the shadows of the overhanging trees. To the flying Nazgul, the river became a confusing mosaic, the boat just another piece of the moving darkness. To the desperate eyes in the boat, a single, focused beam would occasionally pierce the murk, illuminating the sheer rock face ahead just enough to reveal two immense, silent figures. The pillars of the kings, the Argonath, stood as silent sentinels, their stony gaze a judgment and a warning. Under this protective cloak of calculated light and shadow, the fellowship slipped between the ancient statues, unseen. It was an act of war. Tilion knew it. By actively shielding the ring bearer, he had declared himself an enemy of Sauron. The Dark Lord would now feel his presence not as a distant watcher, but as a meddlesome foe. The Nazgul would remember the strange behavior of the clouds, the uncooperative moonlight, and report it to their master. He had traded his safe, eternal vigil for a stake in this mortal conflict, and there would be no going back. As the little boat was swallowed by the thunder and mist of Roro's Falls, Tilion turned his face toward the east, toward the land of shadow, where the eye now burned with a new and personal hatred. His long watch had finally become a battle. The air over Mordor was a solid thing, a foul brew of ash and shadow that actively repelled his light. Tilion pushed against it, not as a sailor gliding through a gentle night, but as a warrior forcing his way through a wall of hatred. Below, two small figures crawled across a desolation of sharp rock and choking dust, their hope a flickering ember in the overwhelming dark. He could not clear the sky, for this was Sauron's kingdom, and the gloom was woven with the Dark Lord's own malice. So he fought for pinpricks. With a strain that felt like tearing his own soul, he would pierce a temporary hole in the smothering canopy, allowing a single, precious beam of silver to fall upon the ashen ground. For a few heartbeats, it would illuminate a path free of crevices, or reveal a hidden stream of foul water they could, with care, make drinkable. These were not acts of mere illumination. They were lifelines thrown across a vast and hostile ocean. Samwise Gamgee, his heart near breaking with the weight of his master's burden, would look up at these sudden, impossible breaks in the gloom and feel a warmth that had nothing to do with the air's feverish heat. It was a feeling of being seen, of being remembered by something good in a land that had forgotten the very concept of goodness. He would squeeze Frodo's arm and whisper, "Look, a star is shining on us still." Each breach into Mordor cost Tilion dearly. The shadow clung to his essence, a psychic poison that sought to quench his inner fire. He was a being of light and revelation, and this place was anathema to his core nature. To force his way in was to invite a profound exhaustion, a draining of his ancient power. He knew he was spending reserves accumulated over millennia, accepting a personal diminishment that might be permanent. Yet the sight of those two small, stubborn lights of courage moving through the absolute dark made the cost feel trivial. The fate of every tree, every river, every creature that had ever basked in his silver glow was now carried on the shoulders of those hobbits. His entire eternal vigil, all the ages of watching, had narrowed to this single, desperate point. He had to be their guide. Then, on the final, agonizing climb, his weakening light found a glint of fierce determination. A single hobbit eye, filled with a fire that was both the ring's poison and his own unyielding will, stared upward at the impossible black cliffs of Mount Doom. In that gaze, Tilion saw the end of all things, for good or for ill, and with a final, desperate surge of his spirit, he gathered every last vestige of his power, pouring it into one sustained beam to light the last, most terrible steps of the journey. At the very precipice of the cracks of doom, Frodo stood transfixed, the ring's golden band finally sliding onto his finger. In that instant, the world vanished beneath a shroud of pure domination, a shadow that poured from the Dark Lord's will. Tilion saw the fragile thread of hope snap. He could not let it end this way. With a final, desperate cry of his spirit that tore at the fabric of his being, he abandoned all restraint. He channeled every ounce of his ancient power, every memory of starlight on elven hair and moonlight on Númenorian sails, into a single, focused lance of silver. It was not merely light, it was a blade of pure truth, and it fell directly upon the Sammath, nor, piercing the ring's oppressive illusion. For one critical heartbeat, the scene was revealed in stark, terrible clarity. Frodo was not a glorious king, but a small, tortured figure, cloaked in fire and shadow, and there was Gollum, a creature of pure, ravenous need, grappling with his precious. The blinding radiance broke the spell, a shock of reality, so profound it shattered the ring's hold on Frodo's mind. Perhaps it was that sudden, supernatural glare that startled Gollum, that caused his foot to slip on the edge of the chasm. In a tangle of limbs and a final, shrieking cry, he fell, the ring flashing once in that impossible light before it was swallowed by the fire below. The act was a complete and total expenditure. Tilion had poured millennia of accumulated power into that single moment, violating his fundamental nature as a passive watcher to become an active savior. He had judged that the preservation of his own purpose was meaningless if the world he was meant to illuminate fell into eternal night. As the One Ring melted in the primordial fires, the very foundations of the world shuddered. The Tower of Barad-dûr crumbled into dust, and the great eye, filled with a final, impotent rage, was blown away on a wind of nothingness. And as the shadow passed, Tilion's own light flickered, guttered, and grew faint. He was a dying ember in the sky, his power spent, his long vigil seemingly over. The world held its breath in a profound and sudden silence, waiting for a dawn that now, against all odds, would finally come. The last great ship waited at the quay, its white wood glowing with a light that was not of the sun. Tilion poured his essence into the final moments of the Fourth Age, bathing the gray havens in a silver so profound It seemed to stop time itself. He watched the three majestic figures step aboard, their very presence a concentration of the world's fading magic. Elrond, the wise healer, carried the memory of kingdoms lost. Galadriel, who had refused the Dark Lord's ring, held the light of the two trees in her ancient eyes, and Gandalf, the returned guide, seemed to look up and offer a silent, knowing nod to the heavens. This was not just a departure, it was the closing of a book, whose first pages he had illuminated by a lake at the dawn of time. He wove his beams with an artist's sorrow, threading silver through the ship's rigging until the sails themselves appeared to be spun from moonlight. He painted luminous patterns on the crests of the gentle waves, creating a road of shimmering light that stretched from the shore to the horizon. It was a bridge of memory, a final, breathtaking gift to the firstborn he had loved for so long. As the ship caught the wind and began to move, the very air seemed to thin, the music of the world growing quieter, as if a chorus of unmatched beauty had fallen silent one voice at a time. The profound finality of it settled upon Tilion like a physical weight. The oldest and brightest spirits, the keepers of the ancient stories and the great magic, were leaving the world for good. What was his purpose now, in a land where the trees no longer whispered and the stones held no secret songs? His light had been a companion to wonders, a revealer of hidden glories. Now he felt like a guardian of an empty museum, his vigil a tribute to a grandeur that was rapidly receding into legend. The world he had watched for ages was becoming something else, something younger, louder, and far more transient. The stakes of his eternal journey had shifted from the defense of light to the memory of it, as the ship became a speck of brilliant white on the dark ocean, and then vanished into the west. A chapter of his own existence closed with it. The last thread, connecting the elder days to the present, had been severed. He turned his gaze slowly away from the empty sea, letting his light fall once more upon the wide, sleeping lands of Middle-earth. Forests he had watched for millennia now stood silent under the dominion of a new race. The kingdoms of men were spreading, their fires bright and their ambitions vast. Yet to his ancient eyes, the world felt dimmer, its colors muted, its magic fled. His long watch was not over, but its meaning had been irrevocably altered. He was now the last remembrance of that older, brighter world, a silver sentinel for an age of stone and steel. Great stone cities now rose where ancient forests had whispered, their walls etched sharp in his silver gaze. Tilion watched the reunited kingdom spread across the lands, a tapestry of human ambition woven with stone and steel. He saw their need not for paths through dark woods, but for light upon their scrolls and blueprints, and so he consciously shifted his purpose, focusing his beams upon their emerging wonders. He illuminated the great library of Minas Tirith, its white marble glowing like a fallen star, so scholars could work deep into the night, their quills scratching histories onto parchment. His light fell upon the straight, new roads they carved through wilderness, making them ribbons of safe passage under the stars. He became a patron of their order, a celestial lamp for the architects of a new world. In response, the learned men of Gondor and Arnor turned their brass telescopes skyward, charting his phases and the paths of the stars with a precision never before attempted. They named the constellations and predicted the tides, building a foundation of knowledge under his watchful eye. His light had become a symbol of reason and recorded memory. Yet for a being who had witnessed the shaping of mountains and the flight of dragons, this era felt profoundly small. The great deeds were now matters of treaties and trade routes. The conflicts were squabbles over borders. Their lives were such brief, bright flashes. How could he, an eternal constant, truly relate to creatures who measured their time in decades? He felt a vast and growing distance, like a parent watching children play at games he could no longer understand. He made a quiet decision. If he could not share their fleeting passions, he would become the guardian of their accumulated story. His unchanging circuit, his predictable return each month, became the great clock by which they marked their years and seasons. He was the constant in their chaos, the silent witness who would remember their triumphs and failures long after their individual names were dust. The stake was nothing less than the legacy of Middle-earth itself. His light now helped preserve the memory of all that was, even as the world itself slowly forgot the magic that had once coursed through its veins. One evening, his gaze drifted north and west, settling upon a rolling countryside of gentle hills and quiet rivers. This was the Shire. Here, no great cities pierced the sky, and no scholars charted the stars. But as his light filtered through the leafy canopy of Party Tree, touching the round doors and cheerful gardens, he sensed it. The last faint echoes of the old world did not sleep in stone libraries or royal lineages. They slumbered here, in the unassuming hearts of the little folk, in their simple joy and their deep, unshakable courage. And for the first time in an age, a feeling not of sorrow, but of quiet, profound peace settled within Tilion, and he smiled. The great stone circle atop Weathertop stood cold and silent under his gaze. Tilion would linger there, pouring his silver light upon the broken foundations until they gleamed like bone, whispering the names of kings and elves into the wind, names that now lived only in his own ancient memory. He did the same for the shattered dome of Osgiliath, for the overgrown path where the Ents once marched, for every place where the old magic had once pulsed strong. He was trying to read a story to a world that had fallen asleep, hoping a single phrase might stir in some dreamer's mind, and sometimes it did. A lone traveler camping in those ruins might wake with a start, their heart aching with a longing for a home they had never known, or glimpse a fleeting, silver shimmer on a moss-covered statue that vanished when they blinked. These moments were his only victories, tiny sparks in an overwhelming darkness. But for every one who felt the echo, 10,000 passed by without a glance, their minds filled with the practical concerns of the present age. The battle against forgetfulness was a war of attrition, and he was losing it day by day, year by year. The sorrow of it was a quiet, constant hum in his being, a note of profound loss woven into the fabric of his light. He made a final, solemn decision. If the world would not remember its own glory, then he would. He would be the living archive of Arda, the sole witness who kept the entire epic, from the first chord of creation to the last ship, sailing into the west, alive within his spirit. His purpose was no longer just to illuminate the night, but to be a vessel for all the nights that had come before, a silent guardian of a history that was crumbling into dust. In the profound loneliness of this task, his gaze would often drift from the sleeping earth to a single, steady point of light in the western sky. Eärendil, the evening star, sailed his own distant sea, a fellow mariner on the oceans of time. That unchanging, brilliant light was his only conversation, his only comfort in the vast and silent expanse, a reckless impulse, born from millennia of solitary watching, took hold of him. Tilion, for a single, glorious moment, defied the celestial charts. With a gentle tug on the fabric of his orbit, he guided the silver moon directly across the path of the brilliant sun. The world below gasped as day turned to an eerie, premature twilight. The blazing golden disk of Arion was slowly veiled by his own cool, silver sphere, until only a perfect, fiery ring remained in a sky turned the color of bruised violets. It was a coronation of shadow and light, a marriage of fire and silver that the world was never meant to see. Below, the race of men stopped their labors. Some fell to their knees in terror, believing the end of days had come, while others stood in rapturous silence, their faces bathed in the unearthly, directionless glow, feeling a unity in the cosmos they had never dreamed possible. For Tilion, the transgression was a physical thrill. He felt the searing heat of Arion's proximity, a fire that both threatened to consume him and filled him with a terrible, intoxicating energy. He was no longer just following a path. He was creating a moment of impossible beauty, and the sheer artistic joy of it was a rebellion in itself. He knew the valor, the guardians of the world's order, would sense this deviation, this willful blurring of the lines they had so carefully drawn. A chill of possible censure ran through him, but it was dwarfed by the warmth of the act. He had done this not for any strategic reason, not out of duty, but for the simple, profound reason that he could, and because the world deserved to witness such a miracle. It was a decision driven purely by his heart, a testament to how deeply entangled his spirit had become with the fleeting dramas and beauties of the world below. The celestial guardians, it seemed, were not immune to the very passions they watched over. As the moon continued its slow, inevitable drift, the diamond ring of sunlight flared back into a full, triumphant blaze. The eclipse ended as suddenly as it began, the familiar rhythms of day and night reasserting themselves. Tilion returned to his lonely, silvery course, the memory of that perfect, fiery union now etched into his very being. The lingering warmth of the sun on his spirit became a secret treasure, a private fire that would fuel him through the countless cold and solitary nights that stretched into eternity. His silver gaze had swept the brown lands for centuries, seeing only a lifeless, cracked desolation. But over countless turnings of the world, a subtle rhythm began to assert itself against the stillness. In the heart of that vast ruin, a faint, green pulse would quicken only when his own face was full and round in the sky. It was a secret whispered once a month, a fleeting bloom of silvery flowers that opened their petals solely to his light before withering at the first touch of dawn. Night after night, year after year, he focused his beams upon that one stubborn patch of earth, and the pattern grew undeniable. This was no random growth. It was a will, a conscious effort of pure, desperate memory struggling against the land's deep curse. The last, fading echo of the lost Entwives was here, clinging to the poisoned soil, their ancient song of cultivation, reduced to this single, cyclical sigh. The realization struck him with the force of a physical blow. He knew the deep, wandering sorrow of the Ents, the fathers of the trees, who searched endlessly for their lost mates. A part of him screamed to call them, to guide Fangorn himself to this very spot, and end an age of heartbreak. But as he watched the fragile blossoms drink his light, he understood a deeper truth. Their work was too delicate, their presence too faint. The heavy footsteps of an ant, however loving, would be an earthquake in this fragile world. Their recovery demanded not a reunion, but absolute silence and the patient nourishment of moonlight. He made his choice in the space between one heartbeat and the next. He would be their secret keeper. He subtly shaped the quality of his radiance, filtering out the harsh, revealing aspects, and leaving only a gentle, nourishing silver, a light that felt like warm rain to the struggling roots below. He became their unseen gardener, a celestial patron whose only reward was the sight of those stubborn, moon-petaled flowers pushing through the cracked earth once each cycle. The fate of an entire people, their story and their song, now rested on his discretion. To break that trust would be to extinguish their last, best hope. On one particular night, his light lingered on a single, perfect blossom, its petals gleaming like polished pearl. It was a small thing, a fragile argument against the vastness of the surrounding dark, yet it held the entire weight of a forgotten world. He poured a final, tender benediction upon it, before the turning world pulled him onward, leaving the flower and its secret to the safe and silent dark. A new shadow began to stain the lands of men, one his silver beams could not wash away. It rose not from a dark tower or a sorcerer's will, but from the hearts of the people themselves, a spiritual murk born of their own pride and the relentless churn of their machinery. He watched as great cities, once illuminated by his light for scholars and stargazers, now blazed with their own harsh, artificial fires, their inhabitants staring into small, glowing screens, their backs turned to the sky. His light, which had once guided ships and revealed hidden paths, now simply glinted off metal roofs and polluted rivers, unable to penetrate the inner gloom of forgetfulness. He felt a helplessness more profound than any he had known facing dragons or Nazgul, for this enemy had no form to expose, no fortress to besiege. The battle was now against apathy, a quiet corrosion of the spirit for which his celestial fire was a useless weapon. How could he fight a war where the very thing he offered, wonder, was no longer desired? In this new and subtle conflict, he changed his strategy entirely. He turned his full attention away from the sprawling cities and focused his ancient power upon the remaining bastions of untamed beauty. He poured his silver onto the dark, whispering canopy of Fangorn forest, making each leaf glisten like a jewel. He traced the majestic, snow-capped peaks of the misty mountains with a light so pure it seemed to sing. He painted the vast, starlit expanse of the sea with shimmering roads of liquid mercury, each crest a fleeting, perfect sculpture. He was an artist desperately trying to remind the world of its own forgotten masterpiece. He illuminated the intricate patterns of a spider's web, beaded with dew, the silent flight of a great owl, the quiet dance of foxfire in a deep wood. His stake was the very soul of Arda. If the children of this age lost their connection to this ancient, singing beauty, the great music that had shaped the world would fade into a final, irrevocable silence, not with a cataclysm, but with a shrug. And so his gaze now rests most often on the most remote and secret places, the hidden valleys and forgotten shores where the old magic slumbers, not dead, but waiting. He keeps a patient watch over these last reservoirs of wonder, a gardener tending seeds in the hope that a future generation will once again learn to look up and see. A quiet desperation began to eclipse his ancient sorrow. Tilion could feel the world's spirit dimming, a slow fade into a gray and pragmatic sleep. He knew he could not fight this shadow alone. So he did something he had not done since the First Age. He reached out, not with a shout, but with a gentle, persistent hum that resonated along the threads of light, connecting the heavens. He called to the steadfast stars, his ancient brethren who had witnessed the world's birth. He whispered to the wandering planets, the free spirits of the celestial deep. He proposed a covenant, a single, coordinated act of remembrance. For one night, they would weave their disparate lights into a single, silent symphony. The effort of such coordination was immense, a psychic strain that threatened to unravel his very being. He had to marshal wills that had moved in solitary grandeur for millennia, using all the patience and knowledge of cosmic patterns he had gathered over his endless journey. He was no longer just a guide, he was a conductor, and the fate of wonder itself rested on this performance. On the appointed night, the sky awoke. Constellations did not merely shine, they pulsed in a slow, harmonious rhythm. Planets that were usually distant points of light flared with sudden, benevolent intensity, tracing intricate, interlocking patterns against the velvet dark. The Milky Way, usually a soft river, became a crashing waterfall of liquid diamond. It was a dance of light on a scale the world had never seen, a silent music written in pure radiance. Below, in the sprawling, distracted cities, people stumbled into the streets, their glowing screens forgotten. They looked up, and for the first time in generations, they felt a collective, breathless awe. Children pointed with uncomplicated joy, while their elders felt a long dormant ache in their hearts, a memory of a time when the night was full of mystery and promise. In the days that followed, a global rekindling began. Artists, their imaginations set ablaze, rushed to capture the impossible patterns on canvas. Astronomers, humbled and exhilarated, scrambled to update their charts, founding new societies dedicated to understanding the sky's hidden language. The event became a shared memory, a touchstone for a renewed connection to the cosmos. As the last echoes of the symphony faded, a profound exhaustion settled over Tilion. The effort had drained him and his celestial kin, leaving them faint and distant. But the silence that followed was not the empty quiet of before. It was a hopeful hush, filled with the lingering echo of a billion uplifted hearts, a promise that the world's song was not yet over. He began to trace the delicate arcs of mortal lives, from first breath to last. When a child was born with the spark of a great king, or the soul of a gentle healer, Tilion would focus his beams upon that humble home, bathing the newborn in a light of such soft clarity, it felt like a caress. The parents would sense a profound, unnameable peace, a feeling that the universe itself was welcoming their child with a silent blessing. And when a life of wisdom and kindness neared its end, he would do the same, ensuring the final moments were cradled in a luminous, silver peace, as if the night were holding its breath in reverence. These were not grand celestial events, but quiet, intimate gifts, a secret acknowledgement of a story well lived. For Tilion, this intimate watch became the core of his purpose. He felt a surge of pure, uncomplicated joy with every birth, a celebration of potential and new beginnings. But with that joy came an inevitable, crushing sorrow. He alone witnessed the full, heartbreaking span of these brief, brilliant lives. He saw the infant he had blessed grow into a leader, make difficult choices, feel love and loss, and finally age into the wise elder whose passing he would also illuminate. He experienced the full emotional weight of every story, from its hopeful prologue to its quiet, final sentence. To witness so much beauty and so much pain in such rapid succession was a torment that no other eternal being had ever chosen to bear. Yet he embraced this bittersweet duty without hesitation. He saw it as the highest form of his service, a way to honor the individual threads that, woven together, created the great, unfolding tapestry of Arda. Each life he marked became a part of his own ancient memory, a cherished note in the long, slow music of his existence. The weight of millennia of such stories was immense, a burden that would have shattered a lesser spirit, yet it was also his greatest reward, for it kept his heart connected to the living, breathing world below. His gaze now falls upon a small child, leaning on a windowsill, her face upturned to the sky. Her eyes are wide, not with fear of the dark, but with a pure, unasked wonder, a reflection of the same awe the first elves felt at the waters of Cuiviénen. In her simple gaze, he sees the cycle begin anew, and he pours a gentle, invisible light upon her, a silent welcome to the great and beautiful story. His silver gaze found its most cherished resting place in the gentle hills of the Shire. Tilion would coax his vessel to slow its celestial pace just a little, letting his light pool in the lush valleys and spill over the round, green doors of hobbit holes. He made sure the party field was bathed in a brilliant, cheerful silver for every festival, and he guided his beams into every garden, coaxing the plump tomatoes and prize-winning cabbages to grow a little larger, a little sweeter, under his nurturing glow. The hobbits, for their part, never looked up and wondered why. They simply felt an unshakable sense of well-being on clear, moonlit nights. Their songs seemed merrier, their laughter came easier, and their harvests were the envy of the world, all credited to good Shire soil and plain hard work. They were unaware of their celestial gardener, and that was precisely how he preferred it. This quiet favoritism was a secret rebellion. He was a Maia, a being created to guide the course of the very heavens, and here he was, meticulously ensuring that a particular patch of parsley received just the right amount of luminous attention. It was a deviation from the grand, impartial mechanics of his cosmic duty, a small, personal indulgence he granted himself. Yet, when he saw the simple, uncomplicated joy of a hobbit family sharing a meal in their garden under his light, the profound peace that radiated from their little lives felt more sacred than any ancient prophecy. He could not resist it, and so the Shire became a permanent fixture of his favorite vistas. He did not chart its position out of strategic necessity or a sense of guardianship, but for the sheer, soul-restoring pleasure of it. It was the one place in all of Middle-earth he visited not because he had to, but because he wanted to. In guarding their innocent peace and stubborn simplicity, he was protecting something far greater than a geographical location. He was guarding a last, vital remnant of the old world's heart, a living treasure of contentment and courage that was, in its own quiet way, as precious and worthy of protection as any Silmaril. His light catches the warm, golden glow of a hearth fire, shining from a familiar round window in Bag End, and for a moment, the ancient Maia is content, for here, at least, the memory of true peace is kept alive. A profound stillness fell upon him, a cessation of movement so complete it felt like the universe itself had paused. Tilion stopped. He halted the eternal forward momentum of his silver vessel, letting it hang motionless in the velvet dark, and he began the arduous work of quieting his own spirit. For ages, his mind had been a map of Middle-earth, charting the rise and fall of kingdoms and the fleeting lives of mortals. Now, he had to silence it all, to let the clamor of the world fade into a distant murmur. It was a battle against his own nature, against the deep, personal attachments he had forged over millennia. He had to let go of the memory of Hobbit laughter and elven sorrow, of Númenorian pride and the chill of Mordor, to listen for something far older. And then he heard it, not with his ears, but with the core of his being, a vibration so deep and fundamental, it was the fabric of space-time itself. It was the Ainulindala, the great music of the Ainur, the theme with which Eru had first shaped the world. It was not a melody one could hum, but a complex, interweaving harmony of existence, a single, eternal chord that contained within it every possibility of light and shadow, joy and grief. His own silver light was merely one shimmering note within that immense symphony, a single thread in an infinite tapestry. The realization washed over him not as a diminishment, but as a liberation. He was not alone in his vigil. He was part of a cosmic chorus, and his purpose was to play his one note with perfect clarity and devotion. The weight of the ages, the accumulated sorrow of watching so much beauty pass into memory, lifted from him. His spirit, which had felt so frayed and weary, was suddenly refreshed, flooded with a sense of peace and belonging he had not known since before his journey began. From that moment, he made a vow to himself. He would carve out a sliver of each cycle, a sacred interval of perfect silence, to listen for the music. This would be his anchor and his renewal, a way to cleanse his light of the world's accumulating tarnish and realign it with its original, pure intent. This practice became his most vital discipline, a secret ritual that protected him from the despair that threatened eternal beings. When the loneliness of his path felt overwhelming, or when the shadow of mortal forgetfulness seemed too vast to fight, he would stop and listen and remember. The deep, resonant hum of the music would steady him, reminding him that his light was never meant to win a war, but simply to be a faithful expression of a beauty that predated the world itself. Refreshed and realigned, he would gently urge the moon back into its ordained course, his silver light now carrying a soft, new resonance, a subtle hum that was perfectly in tune with the deep and enduring song of creation. A new presence shimmered at the edge of his perception, a flicker of raw, untamed curiosity against the static field of starlight. It was a young Maia, its spirit untethered and full of questions, drawn not to the fierce glory of the sun or the deep mysteries of the earth, but to the quiet poetry of the night. Tilion felt a profound and unfamiliar impulse stir within his ancient heart, a desire to reach out. He extended a thread of his own consciousness, a gentle invitation into the silent rhythm of his vigil. The young spirit approached with a mixture of awe and trepidation, and for the first time in millennia, Tilion was no longer alone in his silver vessel. His initial lessons were practical, the fundamental grammar of the heavens. He taught the apprentice how to read the slow, stately dance of the constellations, not as fixed points, but as a living clockwork that measured the breathing of the world. He demonstrated the art of gentle illumination, how to coax light onto a landscape without startling the creatures that dwelled there, how to reveal a hidden path without exposing the traveler to unseen dangers. He spoke of patience, the immense discipline required to watch eons pass without growing weary or cynical, but the technical skills were the easy part. The true conflict arose from a deep, personal fear. He looked at this innocent, unburdened spirit and saw a mirror of his own ancient self before the long ages of war and loss had marked him. How could he teach the patterns of the stars without also imparting the memory of the shadows that had moved beneath them? Would his instruction be a gift of knowledge or a transfer of his own accumulated sorrow? He worried that his protective love for the world below, a love forged in fire and grief, would become a bias, a limitation on this new guardian's own unique perspective. His most important decision was made in a moment of silent reflection. He would not hide the truth of the world's pain, for that would be a lie, but he would frame it within the greater context of its enduring beauty. He showed the apprentice not just the cold mechanics of his orbit, but the warmth of a hobbit's hearth fire glowing in the distant Shire. He pointed out the faint, stubborn green pulse in the brown lands and whispered the story of the Entwives, not as a tragedy, but as a testament to enduring hope. He taught the love, not just the duty. The stakes of this mentorship were nothing less than the future of the celestial order itself. Tilion knew his own light, though eternal, was no longer the pristine beacon it had once been. It was weathered, tempered by experience, and carried the faint, melancholic hum of all it had witnessed. If he failed, if he could not pass on the sacred craft of guardianship, the knowledge of how to watch with both a sharp eye and a compassionate heart would be lost forever. The night sky would become a cold, impersonal clock, its magic reduced to mere physics. The moment of truth arrived when the young Maia, its lessons complete, trembled on the threshold of its first solo journey. Tilion withdrew his guiding presence, a terrible emptiness opening within him. He watched as the apprentice gathered its courage and set out along the path of a minor constellation, a delicate thread of new light tracing the ancient pattern. Its illumination was tentative at first, then grew in confidence, a fresh, clean silver that held no memory of shadow, only pure, unadulterated wonder. And as Tilion watched that new light weave itself into the tapestry of the heavens, he felt a sensation he had not known for millennia, a fierce, swelling pride that momentarily eclipsed all his ancient loneliness. A new sentinel had joined the long watch. A coldness brushed against the outer darkness, a stillness that was not peace, but the utter absence of being. Tilion felt it before he saw it, a subtle drain on the warmth of his own spirit, a quiet hunger that fed on time itself. This was no creature of shadow, for shadow is cast by light, but a void-born entity, a sentient nothingness that sought to unmake the very sequence of events, to devour the past and starve the future. It approached the borders of Arda, a silent, spreading stain against the star-flecked void, and the Maia knew with a chilling certainty that he was the only thing standing in its path. His silver light, born of the timeless trees and tempered by ages of history, was the antithesis of this nullity. He did not attack, for there was nothing to strike, no form to assail. Instead, he positioned his vessel directly in the entity's path and poured forth his essence, not as a beam, but as a wall. He created a barrier of pure, remembered light, a shield woven from the music of creation itself. The void pressed against it, and Tilion felt a sensation more terrifying than any physical wound. It was the chill of absolute oblivion, a force that sought not to corrupt or conquer, but to simply erase. It tested the fabric of his being, probing for a weakness, a moment of doubt or forgetfulness. His own ancient memories felt thin and fragile under that relentless, hungry gaze. In that moment of supreme crisis, he did not retreat into himself. He did the opposite. He opened the vast archives of his spirit, channeling every joy, every sorrow, every love and loss he had ever witnessed into the luminous barrier. He sent the first song of the Elves at Cuiviénen, ringing into the silence. He projected the fierce love of a Hobbit for his home, the enduring hope of the Entwives, the proud sorrow of the last ship into the west. He showed the void a king's coronation and a child's first step, the fall of a tower and the bloom of a single, stubborn flower. This tapestry of lived experience, so rich and complex and beautiful in its fleeting nature, was a language the entity could not comprehend. Its nullity recoiled from the sheer, defiant weight of it all. The silence beyond the barrier shuddered and then withdrew, repelled not by force, but by meaning. The immediate threat had passed, but the cost was immense. Tilion felt hollowed out, his light momentarily dimmed by the monumental effort of defending all of reality. He had held the line, and in doing so, he had woven his own fate inextricably into the timeline he protected. His watch was no longer just an observation. It was a fundamental pillar supporting the continuum of history itself. The flow of past into future now depended on his unwavering presence in the sky, a silent guardian against the terrifying quiet that lay beyond the edges of the world. The silver light could touch more than just the waking world. Tilion learned to weave his beams into the very substance of sleep, sending threads of his essence into the dreams of mortals below. He did not create the dreams themselves. That was a power beyond his domain, but he could infuse them with the raw materials of wonder. He would gather the memory of starlight on elven hair, the echo of a waterfall in a hidden valley, the profound peace of the Shire at dusk, and spin these fragments into luminous visions that visited sleeping minds. He sought out artists with hungry hearts and children with unclouded imaginations, those whose spirits were open to receiving such a gift without demanding to know its source. A painter would wake with the ghost of a city made of pearl and silver haunting her mind, rushing to her canvas before the memory faded. A storyteller would find a complete, intricate tale waiting in his thoughts upon dawn, a legend he was certain he had never read but that felt hauntingly true. These were not commands or detailed instructions, but seeds. Tilion provided the spark of beauty, the fragment of a lost song, and then he withdrew, allowing the mortal soul to nurture it with its own experiences, its own fears and joys, until it grew into something entirely new and yet mysteriously ancient. The world began to be enriched by moon-touched symphonies that seemed to echo the deep music of creation, by poems that spoke of lost Beliri, and as if the author had walked its shores, by inventions that blended elven elegance with human practicality. It was a subtle, constant infusion of the elder days into the modern world, a thread of magic woven into the fabric of a mundane age. The responsibility was immense. He had to tread a razor's edge between inspiration and interference. To dictate a dream would be to strip the mortal of their creative freedom, to make them a puppet instead of a partner. He was a gardener planting seeds in the fertile soil of the mind, not an architect building palaces there. His only rule was to focus his gifts on those whose hearts leaned toward creation, not domination. He He avoided the proud and the greedy, for a dream of power could easily curdle into a waking nightmare. The stake was nothing less than the cultural and spiritual health of the world. In an age increasingly dominated by noise and haste, he was ensuring that the quiet wellspring of creativity and hope never fully ran dry. One night, his light fell upon a composer who had struggled for months with a silent muse. Tilion sent a single, pure strand of memory into the man's dream, the sound of water music from a fountain in Gondolin, a melody lost for thousands of years. The composer awoke with a start, his heart pounding, the ghost of that liquid harmony ringing in his ears. He scrambled in the dark for a pen, frantically scribbling notes on a sheet of paper before the beautiful ghost could fade. And high above, watching the man capture an echo of the spheres, Tilion smiled. The long silence between them was a void deeper than space. For ages, Tilion had felt the sun's distant, jealous flame as a constant pressure, a force that defined his own path by its opposition. He sailed in her wake, a cooler echo to her blazing glory, their relationship defined by separation and the strict laws of the Valar. But watching the world below, he saw how the children of Iluvatar thrived in the moments of transition, in the gentle mingling of their two lights at dawn and dusk. A quiet, rebellious idea began to form within him, an impulse not of duty, but of artistic yearning. He would break the unspoken rule of their parallel existence. With a gentle, deliberate tug on the fabric of his orbit, he slowed his descent one evening, holding his silver vessel in the western sky for a few moments longer than was strictly ordained. It was a subtle gesture, a question written in light against the fading blue. The response was not immediate. The horizon blazed with Arian's departure, fierce and solitary, as always. But then, something miraculous happened. Instead of vanishing completely, the sun's final rays seemed to hesitate, to linger and soften, reaching back toward the lingering moon. Her light, usually so fierce and possessive, bled into a palette of impossible colors, lavenders and deep roses, and a molten gold that caressed the edges of his own cool silver. The initial communication was clumsy, a celestial stutter. His light wavered with the vulnerability of his overture, while hers pulsed with the surprise of being addressed after millennia of proud isolation. They were two masters of different instruments, suddenly attempting a duet without a score. The tension of that first attempt was palpable across the heavens, a silent negotiation between fire and crystal. Yet the shared goal of creating something truly beautiful began to smooth their awkward rhythms. They learned to listen to the music of the spheres, to feel the other's presence not as a rival, but as a partner in a grand daily performance. Tilion would angle his beams to highlight the texture of the clouds Arian, painted with fire, and she, in turn, would temper her glare so his silver could dance alongside her gold without being drowned. The result was a prolonged, breathtaking twilight that felt like a new realm of existence, a time that belonged wholly to neither day nor night. These collaborative dawns and dusks became the most spectacular the world had ever witnessed, a daily reminder to every living creature below that harmony was possible, even between the most different of natures. This was more than a celestial light show. It was a mending of an ancient, fundamental rift in the fabric of Arda itself. Their successful partnership sent a quiet shockwave through the order of the world. Other Maiar, who had long pursued their duties in solitary splendor, took note. The precedent was set, a new language of cooperation, whispered among the winds and the waters. As that first, consciously crafted twilight finally faded into a star-dusted night, Tilion felt a warmth settle within his spirit that had nothing to do with solar fire. It was the gentle, enduring heat of a companionship, long desired and finally achieved, a silent promise written in the shared sky. His silver light became a quill, and the sleeping world his parchment. With painstaking care, Tilion began to inscribe the chronicles of the night. He did not carve words into stone or ink them onto scrolls. Instead, he painted with photons and shadow. On the still, black surface of a mountain lake, he would arrange the reflection of stars into constellations that told of Baron's quest for the Silmaril. Across a vast meadow, he guided the fall of dew so that at dawn, the droplets on 1,000 spider webs would glimmer in a pattern that mapped the hidden paths the Fellowship took through a region. On a frosty windowpane, in a quiet village, he etched crystalline ferns that, if one knew how to look, perfectly mirrored the branching lineage of the kings of Númenor before the fall. The natural world was being transformed into a vast, silent library, its shelves stocked with moonlight, and its books written in the language of physics and beauty. Every glade held a love story, every frozen puddle a record of a lost battle, every pattern of lichen on a north-facing stone a genealogy of the elder days. The entire nocturnal history of Middle-earth was now encoded into the very substance of Arda, a backup copy written in a language more durable than any mortal tongue. But the work was a constant, draining effort. It required a fraction of his consciousness to be forever divided, a part of his mind perpetually dedicated to this grand, archival project. He was not merely shining, he was composing, arranging, and remembering on a global scale, and a deep, gnawing fear accompanied every exquisite pattern he finished. He was writing in a language the world was rapidly forgetting. Who now could read the message in the arrangement of moth wings around a flame? Who would understand that the specific way moonlight dappled through a certain oak tree told the story of Luthion's first dance? He feared he was building the most magnificent library in existence, only to lock the door and throw away the key for an audience that would never arrive. The silence of his potential readers was a heavier burden than the physical toll of the work, yet he pressed on, his resolve hardening with each passing cycle. The record had to be kept. It was a sacred debt he owed to the past, a promise made to every soul whose story he had witnessed. He committed to the task with the grim determination of a soldier, holding a position against an advancing tide of oblivion. He would be the scribe, even if the readers were centuries or millennia away. This was his magnum opus, the ultimate fulfillment of his purpose as the eternal witness. If his light was to have any meaning beyond mere illumination, it was this: to ensure that the truth of what had been would never be entirely erased. One clear, cold night, high in the misty mountains, he finished a particularly intricate tale. Using the thin layer of ice on a secluded tarn as his canvas, he depicted the moment the eagles rescued Frodo and Sam from the slopes of Mount Doom. Every feather of the great birds, every fold of the Hobbits' cloaks, was rendered in infinitesimal lines of frozen silver. Stepping back in his mind to admire the completed work, a deep and quiet satisfaction flowed through him, a feeling of profound rightness that momentarily eclipsed the ever-present fear of forgetfulness. The story was safe. It was now part of the mountain, waiting in the patient cold for an eye that knew how to see. The time came when his guidance was no longer needed. A profound shift was occurring in the hearts of the race of men. They no longer huddled in fear of the dark, looking to his silver face for salvation. Instead, they built great braziers in their town squares and hung lanterns along their cobbled streets, creating their own constellations of warm, earthly light. Their cities began to glitter on the plains and hills, a testament to their growing confidence. They looked to the stars not for mystical paths, but for the mathematics of navigation, charting their own courses with instruments of brass and glass. Their own inner lights of reason and knowledge were kindling, and Tilion knew, with a deep and aching certainty, that his long, intimate guardianship must now change. This was the hardest decision of his eternal life. To withdraw his active spirit felt like a profound abandonment, a betrayal of the trust he had built over millennia. He remembered the terror in the eyes of the first elves and the hopeful faces of the Númenorian shipwrights. How could he simply step back and watch them stumble? But the opposite choice, to remain as their constant celestial crutch, would be a far greater sin. It would stunt their growth, keeping them as eternal children beneath a paternal sky. They needed to learn self-reliance, to find their own courage in the dark, without expecting a benevolent light to always show the way. He made his choice with a love so vast it felt like grief. He would trust them. He consciously began to withdraw the focused intention from his beams, the subtle guidance that had illuminated safe paths and revealed hidden dangers. He stopped weaving his essence into their dreams and no longer marked the births of their great leaders. The moonlight that fell upon the world slowly returned to being a simple, natural phenomenon, a beautiful backdrop to their lives rather than an active participant. It was the final, greatest act of his love for the world, to give it the freedom to grow up without him. The consequence was a new kind of silence in the relationship between the earth and the sky. The people, of course, still appreciated the moon. They wrote poems about its beauty and planned festivals by its phases. But sometimes, on a particularly clear and lonely night, an old woodsman or a thoughtful child would look up and feel a faint, inexplicable longing, a whisper of a memory of a time when the moonlight felt warmer, more personal, as if it were watching over them with a conscious care. They had gained their independence, but they sometimes missed the old, mysterious comfort. As his vessel sailed high over a great human city, its man-made lights twinkling like a field of fallen stars, Tilion felt the old urge to reach out, to bless them, to protect them. He held his spirit in check. He watched their tiny lights, these brave, fleeting sparks of mortal ingenuity, and the feeling that rose within him was not loss, but a quiet, swelling pride. They were finding their own way, and his role was now to be a symbol of that beautiful, self-sufficient journey, a silent witness to their triumph. The great wheel of his journey settled into a perfect, silent rhythm. Tilion ceased his striving, his nudging, his quiet interventions. He released the need to guide or protect, to inspire or to warn, and allowed his being to merge completely with the simple, profound act of seeing. He became a perfect witness, a silver eye in the night whose only purpose was to hold the world in his gaze. His light, now free from the taint of intention, became a pure and constant truth in the heavens, a mirror reflecting the world's own face back to itself without judgment or agenda. It fell upon the birth of a king and the death of a pauper with the same gentle clarity, illuminating a lover's kiss and a soldier's final breath with the same unwavering fidelity. In this perfect passivity, he found a fulfillment deeper than any he had known through action. The echoes of his ancient struggles, the memories of love and loss, did not vanish, but they were smoothed into the fabric of his light, like stones worn smooth in a river, their sharp edges softened by the flow of endless time. His presence was no longer a variable in the world's equation, but a constant, a promise etched in light that while kingdoms rose and fell and individual lives flickered out, some things endured. This constancy became the bedrock upon which the drama of life could safely unfold. His unchanging circuit, his predictable return each month, was a silent vow that the universe possessed an underlying order, a harmony that could be trusted even in the midst of chaos. He was a cornerstone of reality, a silent anchor for the spinning world, and so he continues, cycle after cycle, a silver witness to the endless, beautiful story, watching, always watching. And so his great work is complete, a vigil spanning the birth of stars to the quiet hum of a world now grown. Tilion no longer steers his silver vessel with a guiding hand, for the path is etched into the heavens as deeply as the stories are etched into his spirit. He has become the calm at the center of the turning sky, a presence as constant and reassuring as the tides his light gently pulls. The frantic energy of earlier ages, the desperate choices between intervention and observance, have all settled into a profound and peaceful acceptance. He watches the slow, grand procession of centuries not as a participant, but as the silent, beating heart of the night itself, a repository for every joy and sorrow the world has ever known. His light is no longer a tool, but a testament. It is a living library, and every beam that falls upon a sleeping forest or a quiet city street carries the whisper of an elven song from Cuiviénen, the echo of a hobbit's laughter in the Shire, the solemn pride of a Númenorian king. He is the keeper, the rememberer, ensuring that no act of courage, no spark of love, is ever truly lost to the void. For those who pause to look up, there is a comfort in that pale, silent face that goes beyond simple beauty. It is the comfort of continuity, the gentle promise that our own small stories are part of something vast and enduring. The great tale of Arda, with all its darkness and its dazzling light, is held safe in that celestial gaze, and it is never, ever over.